The 1940s was a decade of two completely different halves for Great Britain. The first half, a brutal fight for survival during World War II, where every major automotive factory stopped making cars and started churning out tanks, fighter plane engines, and munitions. But when peace finally arrived in 1945, British carmakers faced a new crisis: a ruined economy, severe steel shortages, and a strict government mandate: export or die. To survive, British engineers couldn't just rebuild pre-war relics. They had to innovate. And what they created next changed global motoring history forever. Today, we're counting down the top 10 British cars of the 1940s that saved an industry and redefined the automobile. Let's dive in. We start our list with the ultimate bridge between wartime survival and peacetime recovery, the Austin 10. Originally launched in the 1930s, Dick Bursey completely redesigned it right before the war broke out. It gained a semi-unitary body shell and a beautifully rounded radiator grille. When the bombs started falling, civilian production stopped, but the Austin 10 didn't. Modified as Tilley pickups and utility vans, over 53,000 of these tough little machines served the British military. When peace arrived in 1945, Austin instantly flipped the switch back to civilian production. Because Britain desperately needed foreign currency, these were almost entirely shipped abroad, becoming the first post-war British passenger cars to arrive in places like Switzerland and the United States. It wasn't flashy, but it kept the wheels of British industry turning when it mattered most. Next up is a car born purely out of post-war defiance and material shortages: the Triumph Roadster. Developed in the closing days of the war, Triumph wanted something to compete directly with Jaguar. But there was a massive problem. Steel was strictly rationed for essential goods. Triumph's solution? Brilliant British improvisation. They built the body out of sheet aluminum using rubber press tools that had been used to manufacture bomber aircraft during the war. It featured flowing, dramatic curves, sweeping front wings, and a quirky dicky seat in the back where two brave passengers could sit completely exposed to the elements, complete with their own miniature windscreen. Driving one felt like pure Hollywood glamour in an austere, post-war Britain. While Triumph targeted the wealthy, Ford of Britain looked after the working man with the Ford Anglia E04A. Released right on the edge of the war in 1939, this was the epitome of budget motoring. It was simple, utilitarian, and purposefully narrow to thread through tight British streets. Powered by a tiny side-valve engine, it wasn't going to break any land speed records, but it was incredibly fuel-efficient and remarkably cheap. For thousands of British families in the late 40s, the Anglia was their very first taste of automotive freedom after years of wartime rationing. It proved that you didn't need a massive budget to get back on the road. Let's swing the pendulum all the way to the absolute peak of luxury: the 1946 Bentley Mark VI. This car was a monumental milestone because it was the first ever car from Rolls-Royce and Bentley to be sold with a factory-built, all-steel body. Before the war, you bought a rolling chassis from Bentley and sent it to a bespoke coach builder to build the cabin. But the post-war world demanded efficiency. The Mark VI featured a beautifully refined inline-six engine, an incredibly plush interior lined with rich walnut wood and Connolly leather, and a ride so smooth it felt like floating on a cloud. It signaled to the world that British luxury craftsmanship hadn't lost a single step during the war. At number 6, we have the elegant Sunbeam Talbot 90. Launched in 1948, this car perfectly captured the post-war craving for sporting elegance. Available as either a sports saloon or a gorgeous drop-head coupe, it paired a streamlined, fastback-style rear end with an incredibly aristocratic front grille. But the Sunbeam Talbot 90 wasn't just a pretty face. It was highly competitive, proving its mettle in tough international motorsports. Legendary British driver Stirling Moss famously drove one to a second-place finish in the grueling 1952 Monte Carlo Rally. It was fast, beautifully engineered, and possessed a distinct air of British class. If you want to talk about true, unadulterated post-war innovation, look no further than the Jowett Javelin. Built by a relatively small, independent manufacturer based in Yorkshire, the Javelin looked like it had dropped out of a science fiction movie compared to its boxy competitors. Engineered by Gerald Palmer, It featured an incredibly advanced aerodynamic body with an integrated curved windscreen. Under the hood sat a highly unusual, water-cooled flat-4 engine. Because the engine was flat and sat far forward, it opened up a massive amount of cabin space. The Javelin could comfortably sit 6 adults and easily cruise at 80 miles per hour. It was a brilliant masterclass in forward-thinking design that embarrassed much larger manufacturers. Now we enter the absolute heavyweights. Number 4 is the car that single-handedly ignited America's obsession with the sports car, the MGTC. When American GIs were stationed in Britain during the war, they fell in love with lightweight, nimble British roadsters. Seeing an opportunity, MG rushed the TC into production in late 1945. It was incredibly old-fashioned, featuring a flexible ladder chassis, a wood-frame body, and solid axle suspension. But it didn't matter. It was raw, immediate, and pure fun. Thousands of TCs were shipped across the Atlantic. For young Americans used to massive, heavy, straight-line cruisers, the lightweight MGTC was a revelation. It proved that handling and driving dynamics could be far more exciting than pure horsepower. Our number 3 spot goes to a vehicle that was only ever intended to be a temporary, 2-year stopgap measure to save a company, the Land Rover Series I. In 1947, the Rover Car Company was struggling. Steel rations meant they couldn't build their luxury saloons. Rover's engineering chief, Maurice Wilkes, noticed how useful surplus military Willys Jeeps were on his own farm. He decided to build a British alternative. Because of the steel shortage, they built the body out of a plentiful surplus alloy of aluminum and magnesium called Burma-Bright. They painted it in various shades of military green because that was the only paint available in large quantities. It featured a center steering column in early prototypes, a PTO shaft to run farm machinery, and a rugged 4-wheel drive system. It was an instant global phenomenon, outselling Rover's passenger cars within 2 years. It didn't just save Rover. It created an automotive legend that would conquer the furthest corners of the earth for the next 7 decades. Taking the silver medal is the undisputed king of the British post-war street, the Morris Minor. Debuting at the 1948 London Motor Show, it was designed by a young genius named Alec Isagones, the man who would later go on to invent the Mini. Isagones wanted to build a small, affordable car that offered the comfort and luxury of a large vehicle. The Minor was a technological masterpiece for its time, featuring monocoque construction, independent front suspension, and precise rack and pinion steering. It handled beautifully, maximized interior space, and was incredibly easy to fix. Affectionately known as the Moggy, it became a permanent fixture of British culture. It went on to become the very first British car in history to sell over 1 million units. And finally, our number 1 spot belongs to the car that completely stunned the world and put British sports cars at the absolute top of the global food chain, the Jaguar XK120. When Jaguar boss William Lyons unveiled the XK120 at the 1948 London Motor Show, it was originally meant to be a limited production showpiece just to advertise Jaguar's brand new, twin-cam straight-six engine. But the moment the cloth was pulled back, the crowd went absolutely wild. It was arguably the most beautiful car ever styled, but its performance was even more shocking. The 120 stood for 120 miles per hour, making it the undisputed fastest production car in the entire world at the time. Even better, it cost roughly half the price of an equivalent Aston Martin or Ferrari. The XK120 earned the vital foreign dollars Britain desperately needed and kicked off a glorious racing lineage that would dominate Le Mans throughout the 1950s. It is, without a doubt, the greatest British car of the 1940s. From humble wartime heroes to world speed record breakers, these cars didn't just transport people. They saved the British automotive industry from total extinction. Which of these 1940s classics is your favorite? Would you take the rugged Land Rover, the cute Morris Minor, or the legendary Jaguar XK120? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into automotive history, and we'll see you in the next video.